and then went to check the back door. As he did, my father surprise attacked him and jumped on him, and while on top of him, punched him until Mark was unconscious. He then tied him up and then rushed over to untie me. I was grateful, but I needed to check on my baby, and so I rushed upstairs and saw that he was okay. Hi there, my name is Jessica, but everyone calls me Jessie, and I wanted to share a story about my father. You see, he's kind of my hero, and I know that a lot of people say that about their parents, but my father actually is one. Here, let me tell you my story, and I think that in the end, that you'll agree with me. Growing up, my father and I got along really well. I was pretty much a daddy's girl, but rather than playing with dolls and tea sets, my dad taught me how to fish and to hunt. Things did change when I became a teenager, and we didn't spend quite as much time together, but we were still very close. And then when I went off to college, I made a point of calling him and my mom at least a few times a week, just to stay in touch. It was there at college that I met Mark. We were in many of the same classes, and he was such a charming guy. So much so that I pretty much fell in love with him immediately. By second year, we were dating, and over the Christmas holidays, he joined me when I went home to visit my parents. My parents loved him just as much as I did. By the end of college, we were inseparable, and we were on the fast track to being engaged. However, near to our graduation, the first big red flag presented itself. We were talking about what we were planning to do after we graduated, and things became a little heated.
So when we graduate, do you want to live with my parents, or did you want to rent a place near them?
Well, actually, I was hoping that we would keep living close to the college. I like going to visit our families, but I'm liking the idea of us being independent to some degree. Couldn't we rent a place here for a while?
You can't be serious? No. We are moving to be close to my parents. We always do what you want to do, and for once, we will do what I want to. I'm going to be the husband, and you should learn to do as I say.
I had no idea where this was coming from. Mark had never expressed such views before, and the way he was looking at me made me feel a bit scared. If I didn't know any better, I would have run away, as Mark looked like he was seconds away from slapping me. I was so scared that I ran out of the room, and we didn't talk for days. Mark reached out and apologized for the way he spoke. He promised me that he was acting off due to the stress of exams and our upcoming graduation, and that while it was inexcusable, that it would also never happen again. I loved him so much, and I wanted to believe him, and his reasons did make sense. I chose to not mention what happened to anyone, though, as I was worried what they might think. At any rate, the years passed, and Mark and I got married. We decided to settle down in the same city that we went to college in, as it was a good midpoint in between our parents. Both my mom and dad and his were 1 hour away, but in opposite directions, so we felt it was a good compromise. Then one day we got amazing news. We had been trying for a while to have a baby, and suddenly I noticed that I was getting nauseous a lot in the morning. So I took a pregnancy test, and it came back saying that I was pregnant. We were so excited that we could barely contain our enthusiasm. We began buying things like a crib, and even began preparing a nursery for the upcoming baby. Everything was going absolutely perfect. We even made plans for our parents to come out and visit us, so that we could have a big celebration together. The day before our parents were scheduled to arrive, Mark had to work late, and so it was my job to tidy up the house and to go and buy all the groceries that we would need for their visit. I was so flustered and nervous about them coming to visit us that I bought seafood, specifically shrimp, which my father loves more than any other food on this planet, but Mark's mother is deathly allergic to. When I got home, I realized my mistake, and I just put it aside, since I knew that we could just save it for another time when his mother wasn't visiting. But Mark saw the boxes of shrimp and grew incredibly irritated with me.
Why did you buy shrimp?
Oh yes, sorry about that. I forgot that your mother was allergic when I was at the store, but it's okay. I bought plenty of food. We'll just put it aside and eat it when they aren't here.
I want to believe you, but something tells me that it was intentional. Do you hate my mother? Do you want her to have an allergic reaction and die?
No. Of course I don't. It was an honest mistake, but I put the shrimp aside and we won't cook any of it while your mother is here.
You know full well that it was on purpose. And I thought that you said that you would clean the house. This place is disgusting. Do I really have to work overtime and then come home and do everything here? Can I count on you to not be an idiot for once and do something right?
He was so incredibly angry that he grabbed me by the wrist and began shouting at me and shaking my arm as he spoke. I felt so scared and worried that he might hurt me.
I'm going out for a drive. When I get back, this house better be clean.
And so he left. I was so terrified that even though I was exhausted, I set about cleaning the house as much as I could. Mark didn't come home until the next morning, and when he did, he brought home flowers. Once again, he apologized and promised that it would never happen again, that he was under so much stress from work and the pregnancy that he had lost his temper without realizing it. He swore that he would go and speak to a therapist and that it would never happen again. I knew that I shouldn't have believed him, as this was the second time that it had happened, but since he promised to go to therapy, I thought that that would take care of things. I assumed that he would speak to someone and then things could get back on track. But that wouldn't be the last that I saw of Mark's irrational anger. The next day when our parents came to visit, I was so exhausted, and when they asked why I was so tired, I lied and said that it was due to the pregnancy keeping me awake. They bought my excuse, but when my father saw my wrist as bruised as it was, he became concerned. I had to lie to him and tell him that I had slipped in the tub, but I could tell that he wasn't completely buying that. The rest of the visit went quite well, and 5 months later, I gave birth to a wonderful baby boy. That was the happiest day of my life. Looking into the eyes of my son filled my heart with so much happiness. Days later, we were home and relaxing, and I thought that things were going to be perfect from then on. But it was at that time that Mark began to act almost paranoid all the time. I couldn't understand where his fears were coming from, and I just chalked it up to first-time parenting jitters. He baby-proofed the entire house, but that wasn't enough. When I would take our baby for walks, he would ask me about where I went and who I spoke to. I didn't understand why he was asking so many questions, but then one day I made the mistake of telling him that I had spent an hour speaking with one of the men in the neighborhood who had been walking his own baby, and Mark flipped out.
Why were you talking to him for so long? Is he handsome?
I mean, I guess so. But we were just talking about what our newborns were doing and what we had experienced with them so far.
So he was handsome? Are you planning on leaving me for him?
What? No. No, Mark, I have no plans of ever leaving you.
You got that right.
I didn't know what Mark meant by that, but I was to soon find out. That night when I went to bed, Mark didn't join me. He instead stayed downstairs. I didn't know what he was doing until I woke up in the morning and went to make breakfast and found that all of the doors and windows had been boarded shut. He had nailed wooden boards across all of them. Mark, why on earth did you trap us in the house?
Well, you can't leave me if you can't leave.
What are you talking about? I'm not leaving you, Mark.
Then why were you talking to that other man?
He's our neighbor. I was just talking about our babies. Mark, maybe you should call your therapist. You're scaring me. Mark grew enraged when I said that and lunged at me and tied me up. He was so much stronger than me, and there wasn't anything that I could do to stop him.
There. Now you can never leave.
What are you doing? Mark, you're really scaring me. Untie me. Please. What if our baby needs to be fed?
I can't untie you. If I do, then you'll call the police, or you'll run to the neighbors and probably sleep with that guy you talked to yesterday. Admit it. That's what you really want to do, right?
He wasn't making any sense, and I was very worried that he was going to hurt me or my son. Just then the phone rang, and I could see Mark grow even more terrified. In a panic, he gagged me and then answered the phone. It sounded like it was my father who called, as Mark began to tell him that I was unavailable to talk, but he would take a message. I felt so hopeless as I realized that everyone I knew was an hour away and that I was in real danger. Hours passed, and Mark just paced around and acted irrationally. He closed all the blinds in the house and constantly kept checking the doors to make sure they were locked. Then, my father called again, and once again, Mark told him that I was too busy to talk. I didn't know what to do, or even what I could do. I was tied up, and no matter how I struggled, I couldn't free myself, and I couldn't reason with Mark as he had gagged me, so I was left helpless and afraid. Another few hours later, we heard a knock at the front door, and when Mark went to check on it, he found no one there. While he was checking it, though, I saw the back door slowly unlock, and my father came in there. He saw me tied up on the floor, and instantly went into a rage, but he snuck around until he could get the drop on Mark. Mark hadn't noticed him sneak in and had slammed the front door shut, and then went to check the back door. As he did, my father surprise attacked him and jumped on him, and while on top of him, punched him until Mark was unconscious. He then tied him up and then rushed over to untie me. I was grateful, but I needed to check on my baby, and so I rushed upstairs and saw that he was okay. We then called the police and had Mark taken away. As it turned out, he had never actually gone to see a therapist, and without medication, his condition had worsened, and he had lost touch with reality. I honestly had no idea what he would have done if my father hadn't come over to rescue me. As it turned out, when Mark had told him that I wasn't available twice, he had grown suspicious and had made the drive out to see if I needed help with the baby. When he saw that the house's blinds were all closed during the day, he grew even more suspicious and had chosen to ring the doorbell and hide and see who answered the door. When he saw Mark answer the door and looking nervous and a bit manic, he decided to let himself in through the back door with the spare key that I had given him. Once he saw me tied up, he knew that his suspicions were correct and he needed to save me. Mark did end up going to prison, but only for a little bit until he was transferred to a facility that could help him, although I think he might be there for the rest of his life. He has become so paranoid that he sees everyone as a danger to himself, and is incredibly dangerous to be around as he lashes out at people randomly. It makes me sad that he ended up that way, but I also know that there isn't anything I could have done to stop it from happening to him. I am just grateful that my father had the intuition to come and rescue me. There is no telling what tragedy might have befallen me had he not. So what do you think? He's kind of the father of the year, no?